Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire supported by Glendivid Books. Now, it's not every day that someone who served almost at the top of government writes a diary of his time in high office. And it's certainly not every day that the diary turns out to be honest, revealing, and even at times deliciously indiscreet. But then that's what makes the book I'm going to discuss today truly special. And here it is. It's called Policymakers' Journal, and its author, Kaushik Basu, was Dr. Manmohan Singh's chief economic advisor. Thereafter, he served as chief economist at the World Bank, and now he's a distinguished professor of economics at Cornell University. But today, Kaushik Basu is my guest. Professor Basu, let me start with the obvious question. What made you keep a diary as chief economic advisor, and then what made you decide to publish it? This sort of thing is very common in Britain, where lots of people do it. But other than Pranab Mukherjee, there are very few in India who've taken this sort of step. So what made you do it?
Aaron, first of all, thank you very much. I haven't yet got my copy of the book, so I'm feeling envious to see that in your hand. The keeping of the diary was a very easy, instinctive decision very early to do with the complete transformation of the world that I had entered. I was not used to working in government. I had never done it. Suddenly plunged in there, my days seemed to be turned upside down day and night. And I just felt that I ought to record it. And it was also almost a form of survival. I needed to do that a little bit in the evening. I never did it as diligently as I later discovered that Pranab Mukherjee used to do. In fact, I would feel envious. How did he manage that? He would say that at night after the day of full slog, he would write it down properly. For me, it was mnemonics written in a hurry with no attention to grammar. But as I waded more into my days, my time, and there were fascinating moments, I felt I was doing, this is a useful thing, and I kept it. The publication I will come to just now. By the way, it's not just the British, you're right. This was a British tradition of complete, honest diaries. But there are other diaries that one can think of. Galbraith, the ambassador's journal, when he was in India, that period is covered marvelously, the ambassadorial work and also some of the lighter moments of that job. Swami Vivekananda, some of his best writings are his diaries. So there are examples from around, and I kept it. And at the end, the publication decision came much, much later. After my World Bank period, I thought actually there's enough material in it, which people will learn. They'll see some of what happens behind the screen. And that's what got me going.
All right, let's start with how Dr. Manmohan Singh came to offer you the job of chief economic advisor. It was August 2009. You were just about finishing a summer vacation in Delhi. It was virtually your last day before you returned, and you got a phone call from the Prime Minister's office asking if you would accept the job. And you said, I want to meet the Prime Minister first. And that happened literally as you were on your way from home to the airport. Tell me, what did he say that convinced you to accept?
That just to fill in the people, that I was department chairman of the Cornell Economics Department. My last day in Delhi, after my summer vacation, which I normally did there, I got this call from Vinny Mahajan in his office, and she said he's offering. I said, it's too big for me to take a decision like that. I do want to hear what he has in mind. And I was told, she disconnected, came back 10 minutes later, clearly spoke to the Prime Minister, came back and said that, why don't you come tomorrow on your way to the airport? So literally with bags packed, I went to Racecourse Road, his home, and the conversation. There are things that he told me actually were very important. I did not want to get into the usual bureaucratic job where I'm running around doing things even at the top. But Manmohan Singh said, and I think he was completely genuine, he said, I want ideas on the table. Ideas that will be there for us to use or not use, but I want ideas on the table. And I've done this job before. And there have been great earlier moments when the chief economic advisor contributed to India. I want something like that. It was a short conversation, maybe 35 minutes or so. But I felt that it is exciting. But then he added, there was no question of my deciding immediately that I'm going to take it. He added that, I want you, but there's still a procedure involved. And it is typically, Dr. Manmohan Singh said that once we go through, you will be told. And I told him that I'm not giving you a firm promise, I'll take it, but it's sounding very attractive. And I'll write back to you within a couple of days. I called back in a few days from America, because I came back immediately, saying that if the offer comes, I will take it. It took another 2.5 months or so, checking my background, etc., for the offer to come.
Now, as you say, this was your first time in government. It was the first time you would be working with politicians, and you confided to your diary, the first week in my job, I felt miserable. But then you comforted yourself with the thought that if Malinowski could spend several months with the Trobriand Islanders, you could manage to spend a couple of years with Indian politicians in South Block. Tell me, what was it about politicians that made you apprehensive?
Yeah, this is absolutely those moments are captured in those lines. The first weeks were completely distressing, and nothing really sinister or big. It's the way top government echelon functions. Extremely hierarchical, orders come down and you give out orders. It works that way. I'm not used to that world. I'm used to the very, very flat academic world, research world, where there is really no hierarchy, no clear boss. That was troubling me. Then it is the whispers, the discussion, the whole thing I felt it's not my scene. And I was actually, despite the pomp and the pageantry of that, which I had never faced before, which is very nice, but I felt this is not my job. My feeling, this was all in the first weeks, I really felt that if I had a way of going back without causing embarrassment to the Prime Minister, to the Finance Minister, I would really quit and go back to my life of writing and teaching. But I could not do that. It would cause hue and cry. People would look for deeper reasons for my vanishing. But then it struck me, and this is very genuine, Malinowski goes off to the Trobriand Island, which for Malinowski must be one of the most exotic settings that he's living in. But he's there to observe. And I told myself, and this connects very nicely with the first question that you asked, I felt that, look, I can treat this as my visit to the Trobriand Islands. Anthropologists go away to faraway islands to observe the culture and the mores. I am here in North Block to observe the culture and the mores of the top bureaucracy, top politicians. And I will keep note of it the way anthropologists keep note of it. Having said that, within a couple of months, you get into the rhythm. I got into the rhythm, and the work was very, very exciting. So it was no longer really just an observer sitting there at a distance, but someone participating.
But in fact, you got into your rhythm very quickly. You observed very closely and very perceptively. And I want to now come to some of the astonishing conclusions that you came to. For instance, initially, you were baffled by the fact that Indian politicians could speak on so many different topics, which were pretty complex, and they seemed to do it with great fluency. And then you discovered the secret. And this is what you write. The trick, you say, is to speak freely and not hold back because of any silly principles, like when you say something, it must mean something. As long as the sentences are sufficiently convoluted for their content to be a blur of words, others will find meaning in what you say. You saw through politicians like a knife cuts through butter.
Yes, this is absolutely true. Again, as a researcher, as an academic, you're always trying to be as precise and clear as possible. The sentence that you write must convey something very clearly. In politics, you discover, and this gradually, I used to be envious of people who could speak just endlessly. Then you listen with attention. You don't quite know. Is this person on the left or the right? Is this person suggesting one kind of policy or another? It's a blur. It's an ambiguity. It's a kind of skill, I suppose, to be able to speak for a long time without conveying anything. But that was for me very, very important, the discovery that that's the way a lot of political conversation takes place. And I hope I did not give in to that, because clarity, I make a fetish of clarity and try to stick to that.
But that's beautifully put. It's a skill to be able to speak for a long time without actually saying anything. And many listening to you would say that sums up politicians. But you actually hit upon something else about politicians. And once again, I'm going to quote from your book. This time, it's about politicians and corruption. You write, an act of corruption, far from being a source of embarrassment to be kept secret, is in many circles a source of pride. It shows how powerful you are that you can get away by being egregiously corrupt. Hence, in such circles, the more corrupt you are, the more respect you command. And once again, your countrymen will agree with you completely.
I hope so. And this is actually almost an analytical point, that from far away, you think of corruption as something which is awful and kept hidden. And of course, because of the law, after all, there is a process, people do keep it hidden. What is easy to miss out is that in some settings, people actually get empowered by being corrupt. Others respect them for corruption because they have the power to flout the law. This is an observation which is a reality. Actually, there was an incident. I don't think it's recorded in my diary. I was flying from Lucknow to Delhi and waiting at the airport. And a politician came in. I really don't know which party. I don't know who the politician was, but very clearly a politician, because there were people clustered around. He was talking of some corrupt acts, and people were listening to him aghast with admiration for this person. And from this, really, my realization came that for ordinary people, we must learn, because in the end, we must learn to have nothing but disdain for corruption. Even if you are in a position where you can do nothing, that people do get caught in those situations, we must have disdain for people who are corrupt. And that feeling, that anthropological atmosphere will play some role in making it a little bit less attractive for people who do that.
Now, Professor Basu, it's not just politicians you saw through pretty quickly and pretty effectively. You also saw through bureaucrats. This is what you write about them. I have learned that in the Indian bureaucracy, to any question you may be asked, you never say you don't have an answer. If you don't have an answer to the question asked, then give an answer to a question for which you do have an answer, never mind that no one asked that question. Which is why when journalists like me deal with bureaucrats, we never get told what we're asking, we get told something completely different.
Yeah, this is, again, an amazing discovery. This one I hadn't anticipated, but it's almost cultural. You don't say, I don't know, when a question is asked. So you usually turn the question around, answer another question, and then maybe later on you go and do your homework. But that, again, to me, hurts a lot, because, in fact, making economic policy, there's a whole lot of stuff where you just don't have an answer. And repeatedly, you'll have to take time to investigate it. Let me give you one little story. This is, again, people I worked with. Pranab Mukherjee once, the finance minister, sent a note to me saying that if futures markets are opened up in, I forget, grain or something like that, what will be the consequences of that? This is within the first weeks of my joining government. I felt I have never worked on futures markets. So I can't give an answer so quickly. But I realized if I was a bureaucrat, I would have immediately typed up something and sent, because it is easy to produce some words on futures markets. What I did, Karan, I wrote to some top economists with whom I had worked, saying that I had to prepare a note on futures markets and their consequences. Can you suggest some readings? Immediately, some 20 papers were cited and sent to me. I realized I would take 15 days to do that. I sent a note to the finance minister saying, Finance Minister, please let me know how much time I have to write this. And my guess was I would need 15 days. Note came back immediately from Pranab Mukherjee. Can I have it by tomorrow evening? So you realize it's a totally different timeline you're working on. So it's not to blame, but that is the way. And you're taking decisions, you have to do it.
Now, most of us, and that means the entire audience hearing this interview as well, believe that bureaucrats like to present themselves as people who are very busy with an awful lot of work to do. But here again, you have a wonderful pithy comment to make. You say they may plod away 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, but the upshot is they work to a point where efficiency and creativity suffer. So the impression that I'm terribly busy, I'm terribly hard work is only factually correct. The product of that busyness and hard work is quite questionable.
Karan, the hard work, the actual hard work, actually it's quite amazing. The bureaucrats work just very, very hard. But my hunch was that that was hurting in terms of the quality of what comes out. And this I say with a little bit of regret, because in terms of sheer brilliance, it's an amazing. The top echelons of Indian bureaucracy is very, very high quality. There's another analogy that I used to use. The trouble with the Indian bureaucracy is like if you get a group of ace drivers and then put them in a traffic jam, you've got nothing out of the ace drivers. And the bureaucracy at the top is like brilliant people in a traffic jam. They are just sorting out how to get out of the traffic jam. So I do, contrary to what many people feel, I came away with a lot of admiration for the sheer brilliance and the number of hours they would put in. But there is something structural where to get the best out of them, you would need to do some restructuring. And actually, I was beginning to put in time into that, meeting some of the ambassadors to India and high commissioners of Commonwealth countries on the ground that India had inherited a British system. But many countries, I remember a lot of work with the Australian High Commissioner who had reformed their structure of decision making. So, yeah.
We need to reform our structure as well. But you know, your book is not just pithy observations, sometimes deliciously indiscreet as well, about politicians and bureaucrats. Your book is also a lot of lovely descriptions about things that you encountered as chief economic advisor. For instance, on budget day, when you had a ringside view as CEA, this is what you say of MPs. The budget day is an excellent occasion for many to sleep, and several make good use of the opportunity. So our representatives are busy snoring as the future of the country is being laid out before them.
Yeah, some of them. Some of them, yes, I have actually seen people sleep, and when they wake up, you cheer on the right side. If you're on the side of the government, you cheer on one side. If you're on the opposition, you boo. But this is again a comment on a minority that would do that. For them, there was no interest in the nitty-gritties of the budget and the budget making process.
But you know, you have an eagle's eye for observation because you actually managed to understand. And once again, I'm going to use that phrase, see through the customs, practices, and traditions of South Bloc. You write, it has what you call a malaise of permissionism. People are constantly asking for permission to do things, no matter how small, no matter how insignificant. But the one thing for which they never ask permission is to walk into someone else's room. You write, in Indian officialdom, to enter someone's room, not only do you not knock on the door, it's actually considered impolite to knock. I mean, that would shake people in the West, wouldn't it? No one walks into someone's room without knocking. Here, you just walk in and you think it's rude to knock.
So actually, on this, I came away on the side of our Indian custom. This is, some people have the right to meet some people. And if you do have, you can just go right in. And I have stories over there about to knock on Pranab Mukherjee's door when someone comes rushing and saying, what are you doing? I said, look, I have to meet the finance minister, and he knows that. He said, then just go in. And so you push open the door and you present yourself. And later on, I do point out, I think in my diary also, that in the West, you knock, you're told come in, and then you go in. So you lose about 15 seconds. Whereas in India, you burst into the room. So you're there, you're saving that time. So this is, of course, a little difference in cultural difference. The permissionism, Karan, if I may put in a point, I feel there is a bit of a serious, again, structural problem, that it slows things down if every permission goes up to the top. And I felt that there were the most trivial permissions. There were some that would come and stop at me. Some would go up to Pranab Mukherjee. But too many things went up for permission. There should be much greater discretion lower down. And you occasionally monitor them for speed.
Now, the other thing you noticed is that there seems to be a structured pattern of required responses when the Department of Economic Affairs sends you a folder with documents in it. You noticed that it frequently comes with a page that lists 44 suitable or appropriate responses. Give me a sense of what sort of responses are considered appropriate, and why do people have to be told this is the way to respond?
No, that is, I feel, an inadvertent but very funny thing in the folders in the Ministry of Finance that would come to us. The insight page instructed you on common expressions in English and Hindi. So it sort of is meant to teach you to speak Hindi better in these circumstances. So the first one, I think, if I'm not mistaken, is I agree, main sahmat hu. So you have those. Then of the some 40 of them, which is just using the space of the inside cover, most had to do with punctuality and time. So I used to laugh that this is from the days of India when India needed lessons on punctuality. So there were sentences like, delay should be avoided, delay must be explained, reply today without delay. And there would be the Hindi translations next to that. But yeah, innocuous observation, but it was to me fascinating. And one more thing I should tell you. Punctuality, which is most of these were, India is on an improvement trajectory on that. By the time I was working in government, it was actually pretty punctual, the meetings that would take place.
Now, one of the most fascinating, except that for you at the time, it must have been pretty hair-raising, things that happened to you as CEA happened just 6 weeks after you took over. As you write in your book, you were whisked off to a meeting that you were required to chair on a subject called GBS. But you hadn't the faintest idea what those initials stood for. No one told you, and the meeting lasted 40 minutes. How did you survive?
Yeah, this is again very early, and GBS, gross budgetary support, would later become part of my life. But within weeks, this is probably, within weeks or maybe very early months of my being in government, I remember I had come back from Nimrana. There was a meeting there. I had come back exhausted, had one meeting in Planning Commission. Then I had briefing notes. I hadn't looked at it. I was whisked to room 131A in the Ministry of Finance for a meeting. Usually, when you go for a meeting, one custom which I had picked up, I realized, when you enter a meeting, if people stand up, you are chairing the meeting. If that is not the case, someone else is chairing, you go and sit down. I had thought I was opening the folder, something on GBS. I'll go and sit down very quietly and listen. I enter the room and everyone jumps up and I realize that I'm chairing this meeting. So I'm shown to my seat, I sit down and it's on GBS. Others were doing the presentation and I was praying that someone would tell me what that acronym stood for, GBS. And this is true. It was a 40-minute meeting. Nobody said it. GBS is good, GBS is bad, etc. It went on. I tried to figure out, had a faint idea, but I did pull through, chairing a meeting on GBS without knowing what GBS is for 40 minutes.
Well, that is certainly a terrific skill and one that a good bureaucrat should be terribly proud of. I can chair a meeting on a subject I know nothing about. I don't know what it is, but I can chair it very successfully. Now, we're coming to the end of this interview, Professor Basu, but I want to touch on two politicians that you clearly admire. And the first is former President Barack Obama. Now, your book reveals that in 2015, by when you had left India and you were the chief economist at the World Bank, you were invited to the White House to brief President Obama before his visit to India as chief guest for Republic Day. And you made a suggestion to him, quite out of the ordinary, which he accepted, and that led directly to his famous speech at Siri Fort on the 27th of January. You are the man who put the idea in his head. Tell us the story of how that happened.
This was in January when President Barack Obama was to come to India. And before that, he had called, I think, some 4 or 5 of us at most, to brief him about India-America relations. And I used to be at the World Bank that time, so it is a short 15-minute walk to the White House. I literally walked down the road, go to the White House, all done very formally. We sit down, the president is across the table with his advisors, and there are these 4 or 5 of us at this side. I was briefing him on political economy, India-US relations, and I remember I dwelt at length on the importance of soft power, telling President Obama that, what I admire about USA is not the strong power. The strong power is easier, and countries with strong power without soft power hanker for soft power. It is America's soft power, the universities, the space of knowledge, the creativity and he nodded in a way I felt he appreciated that. So we talked about, I also do believe that India and United States, we have a common heritage, and the two economies could really work a lot together. While talking about this, it was a discussion on political economy. I said, Mr. President, also when you're in India, remind Indians about the heritage of democracy and secularism. And I was, of course, referring to the fact that on this, India and United States have very, very similar heritages. Remind them. He laughed and said that, I doubt that's going to make me popular. And that was that. As I was walking out, we were just chatting in the lobby. One of his advisors came and said that, is this something which is a part of Indian thinking? And I remember I told the advisor that very much so. I mean, India's founding of India is on principles very similar to Abe Lincoln's spirit of governance and state. That was it. I come back and, not for a moment am I saying I'm sure that it was a little bit that did it. 27th of January, he's giving a speech at Siri Fort, and he makes this remark saying that I want to remind Indians of India's great heritage, etc., that of secularism and openness. I don't remember the exact terms he used. So I felt very good that maybe my advice to him played a role. And I remember a journalist writing that time that, why should an American be telling us what to do? And I was laughing, saying that there is a small possibility that an American president was doing what an Indian had told him to do. So we should feel good about that. So I'm not sure that it is also in the spirit of Obama's own thinking and most American presidents, with the exception of Donald Trump, that this larger mission of inclusion of humanity is a part of it. And this is across Republicans and Democrats that is there. So I don't know whether he did it on his own or that little intervention I spoke with him that day for more than an hour. We were there, the group of us, whether he picked it up from that, but it did please me that that had happened.
Let me remind the audience that when the president spoke in Siri Fort on the 27th of January 2015, it was widely perceived as a rap across the Modi government's knuckles. The impression, not just abroad, but in India, was that the Modi government was intolerant of dissent. The Modi government was intolerant of Muslims in particular. There was love jihad. There were cow lynchings that were happening. That was very much in the background. The Indian people perceived it as a rap across the Modi government's knuckles. The Modi government itself took it on the chin. It made no comment. There's no doubt they weren't pleased, but they said nothing about it. Let me, however, quote what you write in your book. You write, was it my brief intervention on this subject in the White House that did it? There's no way to be sure, short of asking Obama, but my hunch is it was. And clearly, most other people, when they hear this story, will say, Kaushik Basu did it. He's being modest when he says he can't be sure. Of course, he can't. Only Obama can say it. But why else would Obama's advisors come to you as you're walking out? And as you point out in your book, they actually asked if there were constitutional references in India's constitution that underpinned the commitment to democracy and secularism. And when the president spoke in Siri Fort, he referred specifically to Article 25, which he quoted. That, again, is another link that suggests quite clearly you did it. But let me come to the other politician you admire, This time, it's the Prime Minister you served under, Dr. Manmohan Singh. I'm going to read some of the things you've written about him in your diary. I am convinced that in terms of honesty, basic decency, and in particular lack of guile and intrigue, he has few peers in the world. I am convinced he stands head and shoulders above other politicians. In the firmament of Indian politics and bureaucracy, the person who stands out is the Prime Minister. As I read that, I said to myself, this sounds a little bit like a sophomore student's hero worship. Do you hero worship Dr. Manmohan Singh?
No, I don't. I actually object to hero worship in general, and I don't. But I had a lot of respect for him. And over time, having observed him closely, I became convinced that this was a politician of remarkable quality, really make for major decision making. So the short answer to that is not hero worship, I think. But having seen him, I do believe that he will stand out. His contributions to India will stand out.
Then my last question, how do you explain to yourself the fact that after 10 years as Prime Minister, when he eventually stepped down, people thought of him as weak, indecisive, ineffective, vacillating, and let's be honest, his nickname by then was Manmohan Singh or Sonia's poodle. How do you explain that to yourself?
Yeah, this is public perception and it is wrong. He was a person of, as a Prime Minister, actually a lot of courage. To be modest as a Prime Minister needs courage, and he's stubborn about that. And there is for me, I have a direct incident. I will not actually waste time on that, but let me just come back to this about his relationship with Sonia Gandhi. The saying that he would do whatever she asked for is not correct at all. This is the outside perception. I think they have a lot of mutual respect. Both of them respect the other. But when it came to economic policy, Manmohan Singh was very stubborn. One reason why India was growing so well is that he stuck to that. And here I have a point here, because a lot of the people who would be advising Mrs. Sonia Gandhi were very good friends of mine, activists, and I appreciate their activism and their concern. They are usually very moral people and their objectives I like. But I feel very often they are not realistic about what you have to do to get to the kind of world that they want to create. There, I was much closer to the Prime Minister, who had policy strategies which look very alien to the activist world, but which have a similar objective. So I feel, in many ways, Mrs. Gandhi and Dr. Manmohan Singh were on the same page, but yes, they would have differences of opinion about policy. But when it came to differences of opinion about policy, it was Dr. Manmohan Singh who got his way. And that was because of a mutual respect and not one person listening to the other.
Very quickly, this wasn't a question I intended to ask, but because you brought up the subject that in the economic sphere, Dr. Manmohan Singh was the final decision maker. What about the fact that there were several instances when it seemed, or so it was reported, that the National Advisory Council was pushing him into doing things he didn't believe were either right, or that India wasn't right for them at that point of time? I'm talking about the National Food Security Act, which was enhanced the number of people who would be covered, or even NREGA when it was first being thought of, although that was before you came. Very quickly about that, because I don't want to spend too much time. Doesn't that in a sense suggest that even on economic matters, Sonia and the NAC lent on him, making him take decisions that he was not totally happy with?
No, they leaned on him, true. And there were differences of opinion, true. And I feel very good that at the top, there were differences of opinion and other opinions were brought on him. But I don't think there was any major decision that he was pushed to take in a different way. I'll give you one particular example, right to food, which I think is correct. There were people coming to me and arguing for right to employment. And I said, this is not something that you can enshrine as a right. And there, I think I would be on the same page with Dr. Manmohan Singh. You want everyone to get a job, but to put this down as a right is to demote the word right from what it means. So I feel, yes, there were differences of opinion and opinion that was brought to bear on him, but major decisions on the economy were his decisions, along with Pranab Mukherjee, along with me giving advice. And there were also occasions where I had disagreements with the Prime Minister on opinions. But I feel that is what allowed a rich set of policies to emerge out of India.
Okay, Professor Basu, let's leave it there. I want to thank you for your time, for this wonderful interview, for that magnificent diary that you've written, some of which, as I said earlier, and I say again, is delightfully indiscreet. Thank you for being indiscreet and not politically correct. And also thank you for revealing, even though you've done it modestly, that you're the man who got President Obama to speak. That is something that will fascinate the audience. Thank you. Take care. Stay safe.